Hi everyone, welcome to today's episode. My name is Solomon SM, and my guest today is Tony Anthony. And today he's here to talk to us about API monitoring and observability, why it's important for backend engineering. All right, so Anthony, let's have you.
Oh, thanks, Solomon, for having me, and hi, everyone.
All right, this podcast is sponsored by Mastering Backend Academy. So it's a platform where we teach you backend engineering for 4 to 6 months and make you become a great backend engineer. So you can check out the links on the video. All right. So before we get started, I'd like the discussion to be more focused on why we actually need to have observability and monitoring in our backend systems. We start from the foundations, talking about structured logging, and then moving on to talking about monitoring in your APIs and your backend systems. Okay. So my first question is, can you start by explaining the basics of structured logging and why it is essential for backend engineers?
Thanks for having me again, Solomon. Yeah, so maybe before we even go to structured login, the first question is why do we even care about login in the first place, right?
Okay.
Like, why can't we just build your next Google or Facebook or your next billion-dollar company and put it in production and not log anything? So the reason is that unfortunately in the real world, things break or something might not be going smoothly, or even if things don't break, sometimes there are situations you want to be notified about, like you want to know when certain things happen. And
Mhm.
how do you do that? You put a line in your code that says, when a certain scenario happens, log, which is basically write this message that I've given you into
Mhm.
the we call it the standout output, but basically just log it outside, so that I can, later on I can come and look at the list of whatever my program was writing out and read it
Mhm.
and understand what happened in my program. So that is basically what logging is. Now, what is structured logging? Structured logging is that people were writing these logs for so many years, and they realized that in a real program in production, the logs that are emitted are too much. There's too many. You can't read through everything. You can't constantly be looking at the logs. So it becomes important to search for important, what you're actually looking for. So if you're
Mhm.
interested in finding all the errors or you want to know when your database went down, then maybe you want to search for database within the logs.
Mhm.
And so this was the most very common use case. And so how we solved that as engineers was using tools like grep. And what grep is that you can write a regular expression over many lines of text, and
Yeah.
grep would filter down those lines of text to only the lines that contain whatever regular expression you give to. Regular expression, for those who are not aware, is just, it's like a search syntax. It's a very compressed way of describing what you're looking for in a body of text. And we went pretty far with regular expression, but regular expression is very complicated. It's very complicated to write, and it's even more complicated to read. And certain things are more difficult. For example, if I want to search for multiple things at the same time, it's tricky to do that with regular expressions. So, you know, the, a lot of tooling came out thinking, how can we handle these logs? Structured logging came out as one of that, and structured logging is basically where you write a log message that is usually not too specific to, it's general enough. For
Mm.
example, you can say error happened while writing to the database. Instead of saying the request ID inside the log message or the user ID or the whatever ID, you don't put those IDs in the log message. Instead, you give it as extra metadata to the logs. And that
Yeah.
could be in JSON format. So if you're using JSON, you can have maybe a message field in your JSON that has the general message, and then you can now have maybe a metadata field, or even just list all the extra fields in the rest of the JSON. For example, it could be the user ID, it could be the request ID, any of the information that you might want to search for. So now when you debugging something, you can just go to your logs and say, okay, give me all the logs where the request ID was this or the user ID was this, and you can get all the logs. And so if you have this data, for example, in JSON or in most structured data format, it becomes more possible to take advantage of databases. The field of database engineering has advanced a lot. And for example, even if you just think of MongoDB, you can carry all those logs. Don't do this. You're gonna deal with too much data. It's gonna be a pain. But in principle, you could carry all those JSON log lines and insert them into MongoDB and then just do like a regular object search. Search where this field is this. So we could leverage a database. So that's why you would want to do structured logging, because it's just easier to find the logs using regular or using a better way of searching instead of just writing regular expressions.
Yeah. So that's really awesome. First to start with, so you just broke down everything. For me to give it more context, right? Like I remember back in the day when I used to do logic. So I usually follow the route of storing it in my database. We are going to come to that. but,
You're
but,
Superman.
but I think, yeah. So for me to give a clear definition of structured logging, it's a method of logging where log messages are formatted in a consistent and structured way, right? Typically contains key value pair where you kind of add information, like you said, metadata about the particular log, so that you can kind of identify it again. For example, if you notice that a particular user has an error, you can simply say, I want to see all the logs that belongs to this user. You start seeing it. And then you can now say, I want to see all error type of logs or warning kind of logs or debug kind of logs. You can see all this. And it's really nice. It's the kind of information that can be stored in the database. I actually used that approach in one of my projects when I was starting out. So still discussing on that, let's talk about, okay, why can't we just log to our database? Like when I was writing Laravel, I'm still actually writing Laravel. I used to use a file, so we have one file like that to store logs. So that was okay maybe for because we're doing maybe small projects. But let's talk about it. Why can't we just use database and then create a kind of a dashboard and then give it to somebody like one of our staff to manage and kind of report what is happening there, create charts, create organograms and show structure of what is happening in the system. Why can't we do that instead of kind of using tools?
I mean, nobody said you can't. There are people who actually, I think it's called masochism, but there are people who just like life the hard way. But in a more serious note, so you can do anything you're gonna do. No one is gonna tell you it's your software, but I can tell you the challenges that you would run into. The challenge you would run into is that, first of all, what is the most difficult problem with managing databases? Is that when your project scales, when you have a lot of data, with
Mm-hmm.
each new gigabyte you add into the data, it becomes more difficult to manage. Your queries become so much slower. You're now dealing with this kind of data at scale. So when you start to have 100 million rows in your database table, right, it becomes a pain. Now, the problem is that logs is not like your normal database. In your normal database, maybe you have, let's say you're a big company and you have 1,000 people sign up every day and you're very happy, right? Yeah, 1,000. Oh my goodness, that's 1,000 rows in the table. The problem is that you usually log in more often. So to process that, what each of those 1,000 users, you might even log 10 times. You
Mm-hmm.
might log you might log 20 times. So to put in that 1,000 users, you've logged 20,000 logs. So the point I'm trying to make is that logs tend to just grow very fast,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you end up having a big data problem very quickly, and then it becomes a pain to search through them, to manage them. Also, log data it's not of the same level of importance as those your users that signed up that you're storing in the users table. So, for example, recent log tends to be more important than old log. You want
Mm.
to search for the logs that happened today or the errors that happened in the last week, but maybe you're a little bit less interested in the errors that happened 1 year ago, for example. So you benefit from having a model where you can rotate. That's what it's called. But you can, basically delete uh, maybe logs that are older than a particular time frame. Yeah.
Yeah. So I am actually always more interested in how things actually came to be before we start talking about tools. Right?
Mm.
I know that there are tools that makes it very, very easy, but we'll get there. Now, why can't we just instead of because our database is going to be very difficult to manage and scale when we start having bloated logs and stuff. So why can't we use maybe like log into Slack, send out or maybe kind of set up a kind of a cron job that deletes logs that are older than 30 days. Just use an internal system instead of having to use an external tool that you have to pay
No,
for.
I mean, you can, and a lot of companies do this, right? Okay, maybe you asked two questions. The first two groups of questions. One was, why don't you just log to Slack? I don't think Slack would be very happy if you're sending them 100 gigabytes of Slack messages every day. You probably have to pay a lot too, I imagine, or they will just reach out to you. So please don't log to. But you don't need to use an external tool.
Yeah.
Um, so why you use an external tool is, I mean, multiple reasons. One, the log data can be a lot, and you don't want your engineering team to be bogged down by managing all that huge
Mhm.
data. Two is the user experience. Most login platforms, they've really put in a lot of engineering time into giving you this ability to search for your logs, to filter for what you're looking for. And three, most of the time the logs alone is not what you're really looking for. And that's, I build a company that does observability, and what I always tell people is that people don't sit down to look at logs every day. No
I know.
engineer is sitting down. So what you want from the logs is to derive insight, and that insight could be in order to send alerts when something goes wrong so that you're actually notified. So you
Yeah.
need something that's constantly monitoring and analyzing each of these logs. But two, uh, we are building applications, right? And we care about certain numbers. So, okay, let me tell you about the three pillars of observability. So,
Okay.
the three pillars of observability is actually logs, metrics, and traces, and they all exist for different purposes. So, metrics is, if you think of something that happens over time, and let's say it's the number of signups that your users are making. So every time a user signs up, you mark a point in this 1 hour window, 5 users signed up. In this 10 hour window, 20 users signed up. So over time, that's a metric. So because it's a metric, you can plot it on a graph, right? And you can see, okay, over time, this is the user sign up graph for my product.
Mm-hmm.
With such a graph, you can easily draw a line and say, this line is, this is what I expect, this is the minimum I expect, this is the maximum I expect. So if the actual metrics for any given hour or any given day goes so far below what you expect, then it's very easy to create an alert on such a metric and get notified that something is wrong. So
Mm-hmm.
metrics are good for finding out that something is wrong. You don't know what is wrong. You just know that something is wrong. You know that you're supposed to have 100 signups today, but you had zero signups. So you know something is wrong, but you don't know what yet. So then let's go into the next pillar. Now that you know that something is wrong, you want to most likely look into the traces. So it usually depends, but actually you might actually want to look into the logs first. And the logs is to help you pin it's basically to help you pinpoint like what is the real issue,
Mm.
or maybe just give you an idea. So you check the log to say, okay, were there errors around this time? So now you have an idea of what that time frame. You want to check around this time, what could have been the issue. This endpoint is down. Then you now go into traces. So log can be any kind of messages, while traces is if you have an endpoint, what are
Yeah.
the different things that happened? So in a user sign up endpoint, maybe at one stage you're handling the request, maybe you are unmarshalling some JSON, maybe you are actually writing the user to the database, then maybe you are sending some Slack notification. So there are many components that actually happen during that user sign up, right?
Yeah.
So a trace basically breaks down that request into all those components.
Mm-hmm.
So why a trace is important is that you know that the user sign up endpoint maybe is where the issue is coming from, but what part of that endpoint is really having the problem? And if you see the components, you can usually see, okay, I'm having an error coming out of one of these components, or maybe this particular component is taking too long. It's longer than it's supposed to be. Maybe the DB is taking 10 seconds for every single sign up request instead of, I don't know, 5 milliseconds. So a
Mm.
trace is this graph over time. For one request, this is how that time is spent. So these three pillars of observability, they are very important. And why did I go in there? If you're building software where you really want to keep things running,
Mm.
you usually would want some form of, maybe not all of these three pillars, but you usually need more than just logging. You need a way to correlate them together. So you need a
Okay.
way to see, okay, this is the metric. I created this metric for this data, and to see, okay, correlates that with this is the user that is making a request, and this is the endpoint that they're calling, and this is the logs that happened when this user made the request. So that correlation is very hard to get it by yourself.
All right.
But let me
Okay.
tell you what you can get by yourself. You can easily just log to your files. So you can log to file, and you can use grep, which I mentioned at the beginning of the call, to just search. You can even
Uh-huh.
use, there's some open source tools these days. There is Grafana Loki, which you can set up locally to ingest your logs. You can set up Elasticsearch, but all of them are very good to an extent, because when it becomes time to correlate many different data points, they don't give you that flexibility.
All right. See, you were giving really deep insight. So I'm actually really more interested in the why. Before we start talking about different things around monitoring and observability, I like to know the why because I know it, but I want other people to learn why do we need observability, monitoring? Why do we even think about structured budget? Now I'm coming from the angle where I think I used to build personal projects even when I was starting. One of them was a school app platform where I connect school people together for them to have fun. Now I remember I used Laravel and I used Monolog. I just logged stuff to files, and the highest thing I know I did was log to database. That's how it works. But again, it's not the best strategy because if the project kind of kills like millions of users, that would be a whole lot of stuff. But I'm still on the opinion of why is it important we we even escalate our logs to tools instead of just kind
Let,
of
let me answer. Let me answer the question of why do you even want to have observability in the first place. So
yeah,
have you heard of this? Is it a quote or is it a? But it basically says, if a tree falls in the forest and nobody's there, does it make a sound?
yeah, to the beds. Well, if nobody's
So
there, then, okay, it doesn't make a sound. But
the,
of course, the other
yeah.
reason it does.
So if a tree falls in the forest, did it make a sound? We don't know because there's nobody to see it. So now it's
But
a
that's
dilemma.
what I can, you know.
So the problem with and honestly, it's just a matter of effort. Even if you're using monologue or using files, with some
Mm,
effort you can. There's nothing any of these observability tools do that you cannot replicate by yourself if you put in sufficient amount of effort.
Yeah.
But again, it's not just logs are not just for the sake of logging. How often did you go through those logs to see what are the errors that are happening?
I actually created a dashboard for it. So I'm telling you from my experience.
So did you get alert whenever something goes wrong?
Yeah, then I don't think I had knowledge of push notification. So that would have been very nice for me to get that. But I didn't have knowledge of that. So I only saved them in my DB, and once in a while I go to refresh. So in terms of alert, I didn't get.
So and that is good enough. I mean, I've built a lot of projects that are basically what you described. The only thing is, it depends on it depends on the kind of product you're building and the niche that you are in. For
Mhm.
example, there are niches where I don't want something to go wrong without me knowing as an engineer. I don't want my customer to call me and tell me, "Oh, I tried to send money since last month," or no transaction has been getting sent
And I've
since
been
last
getting them.
month, and then you as the engineer, you didn't even know that transactions were not going through. You're waiting for your customers to call you to tell you that something is broken.
Yeah, stuff
So
like
those are the issues. So
okay.
the whole idea of observability is that you want to know when something has gone wrong. And of course, there are different levels. The first step is knowing that something has gone wrong. Then the best observability tools now try to also give you insight about, what actually went wrong. What information do you need to fix that thing that went wrong? So, like
Yeah,
what you said, yeah, it's a lot of work, right, to set up that push notification and
there's a lot
set
of
up
work.
the yeah.
Yeah, so this is great. I'm getting to know the foundations of why I actually need these observability tools, and it's really great. Instead of just jumping into using them, I want to actually know the ins and outs of the business. Great. So let's move on to the next question. Now, how does structured logic differ from traditional logic? And what are some of the best practices in implementing it effectively? So now we are not talking about observability. We're talking about the foundation of. I think logic is actually where observability is actually started from, because you log and then you observe. I think it's something like that, but you are the best person to tell me, right? So we're talking
So
about.
I think we already spoke about like what separates structured logging from normal logging, right? I think
Okay.
when we're defining it, we kind of had to do that separation, that differentiation. But I can say what I so observability is not the same as logging, right? Because it encompasses a lot more. For example, there's something called synthetic monitors where you can write a monitor and say hit this endpoint every minute and check that this endpoint returns the particular response that it's supposed to be returning.
Okay.
That's a synthetic monitor, and that also falls under observability. But
But
it's
does
not
not
it's not logging.
that's supposed to fall under test?
Yeah, it's also a form of test. It's just that it's a test that is executed every minute.
That is working the way you expect it to work.
Yeah.
Okay, so nine. But anyways, I think I'll just break that down in terms of for people who might not know. So the structured login actually is a bit above traditional login. So normally we just log stuff, and if there is any error, we log it. If there is any warning, we log it. But we don't add metadata to kind of identify where this error happened or who triggered this error, right? So when we start adding this metadata, it makes it structured. Because at this point now, we can query it, we can filter it, and then we can know what exactly happens. So I think that's just the difference that I see there. And then in terms of the best practices in implementing it for your backend system. Now, Anthony, do you have any best practice when you've written a lot of backend and you've implemented lots of structured? How did you what is the one way that you can think of that you can start? I mean,
For implementing what structured logging, you mean?
yeah, exactly. So not with any programming language, like the things that goes into it.
So I didn't hear the question completely.
Yeah, so the question is this. I think it's more technical. Okay, so if somebody wants to start implementing structured logic right now on their backend systems, what would you advise them to start doing? Right? So, is there a pattern that you always choose? For example, right? We talk about the metadata. What should be in there? Should the person have username of the person that triggered that error? Should the person have the password of that person? This kind of stuff. I want people to
So
have an idea of how to actually present these logs.
So it depends on the niche on your industry, right? I mean, if you're in the fintech industry, yes, and you're supposed to be PCI DSS certified, then you probably already know that you should not be logging sensitive user information into logs, except that login provider is also PCI DSS certified, and you have, you can actually trust each other, and you
But
have
there's
their certificates.
no trust in the word.
No, in that case, you are binded by the legal framework, right?
Okay.
Um, but so it's hard for me to tell you what you should log. The main thing is that the message, if you're doing structured logging, the message itself should be general enough. You should not put variable data. Variable data means data that changes between requests inside the message. In other words, you should not put the message ID inside the message. You should not put the user ID or the username or anything that changes a lot inside the message. Instead, those should be in the structured metadata.
Okay.
And now, what would you want to put there? You put information that helps you debug your issues. So when something goes wrong, what would I need? Or what is this smallest subset of information that can help me debug that
Hmm.
issue when it happens? And that could be, it might be the username, user ID, sorry. So you can go into database and search. It might even be the user email, depending on, yes, you don't want to log user, but if that's the only identifier you have, it might be
Yes.
what you need to log. It might now if you're using, I mentioned these three pillars of observability: metrics, traces, logs. So you might want to include, if you're using metrics and traces, you might want to include, for example, the trace ID in the log, so that when you see the logs, you can, for example, see the trace ID that you can go search your whatever platform you use for traces, and then help you investigate and debug whatever issue is going on. So
Yeah.
yeah, it really almost always depends.
Yeah, definitely. It depends on the systems you're building. But I think from what you said, I can pick a few things and add. So let's assume that you want to log a JSON data. So I think the first thing is the message key that describe what happens, right? And then we have type, which basically shows the type of log, if it is error, if it is warning, and if it is debug. I think there are lots of them. Or if it is info or stuff like that. And that alone can give you a nice clue. But then for structured logic, you then have this metadata object inside that gives you a specific identifier, like let's say user ID. That's not a confidential stuff. so, so user
Hopefully
ID,
not.
like user ID, and a few things. I think the dates it happened, so that you can actually filter by date, and a few more other important information that you can filter with.
Yeah, most
So
of the best log engines in your code would actually include the dates by default,
I mean,
because
yourself.
yes, yes, yes. But the date
Well,
is always important.
it's actually not advisable. So from the conversation, I've been trying to, pull some string to see how I can get Anthony to tell us that it is important to do it yourself. It is not advisable to manage your own logs. I mean, you could do that if you are planning to have just 100 users, maybe 1,000 users, right, on your system. I don't know if you can actually do that, but I think you can pay the bills of managing your database for that. But if you're looking at building a system that scales, or you're building a system that is going to scale, right? I don't think you should manage logs by yourself. No matter
I mean,
how.
I can't say that. Just for the records, I'm not saying you shouldn't.
Yeah, yes,
I'm just saying that you need to weigh the trade-offs, right? Logs is a lot of data. It's gonna get stored somewhere. It grows faster than your actual database data. So
mm,
in no time, you find yourself handling hundreds of gigabytes or terabytes of data. So if you are a company that is in a space, for example, there are people who are building this kind of government high security project where for no absolute reason should any data be leaving their platform. Then for this
yeah,
kind of people, then
that means they'll have to
Mhm.
build their own internal log systems.
Exactly. So
And they
it's
have
now a trade-off. It's now you need
to.
to hire the engineers to do that. You need to have enough people that have the experience and then have the capacity to help you manage that.
Yeah, so I was talking to medium size, starting up level business people that comes in. Right? So I don't feel like, because these different tools actually give you a lot of advantages. We are going to come to that, but we are trying to kind of get to the foundation of this whole thing first. Right? Now, the next question is, could you discuss the importance of monitoring in backend engineering and how it helps maintain health and performance of an API or APIs? Right. So here we want to really, really deep dive into monitoring first. What is it? Why is it important? And how we can actually use this to increase our
Can I
performance.
flip the interview a little bit? What is monitoring? What do you think monitoring is? Yes.
Okay.
No, on a
Um,
serious note, I really want to know just because I speak with a lot of people about this topic, right? And
mm,
I'm of the opinion that there is no one definition and everyone has a subset of the definition, and I think
well,
there is no right or wrong. So I want to know, I would just want to hear your own perspective.
what can I say? Right. So nice. I actually have my own way. I think through monitoring. So it is basically observation, but it's not just an observation. It is a continuous observation or collection and analysis of whatever is happening in your system, right? So it's a continuous process where you constantly check through your endpoints to see if it is performing as you think or as you expect, or if it is serving the purpose, and not just your API, not just your endpoint. Check through the entire system. Right? It could be, if there's an error, you get an alert quickly and then you check it. All right. If there's a downtime, you get the alerts faster and then you check it. So it's a system that actually monitor what goes on in your backend system. I don't know if I
Yes,
got that.
you're very
That's
correct. No, 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 you're very correct, and I like that perspective. But I think you've actually answered it. But maybe if I want to contribute to the conversation, I would just highlight some of the things you've said. Right? And what
okay.
are the things that matter? You have a system. You want it to keep working. You
Mm-hmm.
want it to do what you want it to do. So for it to keep doing what you want it to do, you need to keep an eye on certain things. For example, if you have a server, you want to make sure you don't run out of disk space, so that you can, the
Mm.
system doesn't crash.
I
You
think
want to
this
make sure that
happened before. Let me consider that used to happen before when we were running the local service. But I don't think that happens now.
you would be shocked.
When there
But
is
yeah,
automatic scaling for AWS, why should that be happening? But anyways,
because a
that,
lot of people don't exist in niches where paying for AWS makes sense. Not everyone can. Depending on the product that you're selling, AWS might be too expensive.
okay.
Right. But that notwithstanding, that's a different conversation.
Yeah.
Um, what is important is that you want to keep an eye on the numbers that matter to you.
Mm-hmm.
And usually that's some metrics, and then it could also be error rates in your logs. For example, you want to make sure that something has not failed, something is still working, and there are many ways of doing this, right? And that's kind of what observability is about. What are all the tools that are available at our disposal in making sure that our system continues working, and that if the system goes down, that we are the first to know. I asked that thing about if a tree goes down in a forest. Does it make a sound? Um, I think there's another similar quote, but I don't remember the full thing. But they're like, if also like if the tree goes down in the forest, was it really there? If no one saw when it was there.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's by the way. But by having these tools, you just want to know when things have gone wrong. And the tools can be the logs, metrics, traces, but it could also be these synthetic monitors that I mentioned. And all of them play a big role.
All right. So I want to know one thing. Is there a difference between monitoring and observability? Can we clear that? Is it the same thing? Is it the same thing in different words, or there is a clear, distinct difference between monitoring and observability?
The difference is marketing.
Really?
The difference is marketing. No, but on a serious note, so monitoring has come to subsume. So like the term observability includes monitoring as part of it. So it's that we take the monitoring. So monitoring actually came from the era of server, the traditional world of monitoring servers. Monitoring a server for its CPU and its disk space and all those kind of things. That's where that discipline came from. The system admins of that era, they built all of the initial tools and tooling for monitoring, right? Because they had to keep systems running, debug what's going on. Now in 2024, we don't build systems the way we used to do in the 90s. In the 90s, you would put a lot of developers in one room, hopefully not one room, but you get the point. And then they
Yeah.
build something for 6 months, and then you launch after 6 months, and then you now wait another 6 months before the next version is launched, right? But in 2024, we are like shipping updates every day. If you go to the average software company, they are already shipping every day, or that's where they are going to. There's no 6 months. See, that 6 months cycle is only for traditional software these days. So obviously, in the 90s, it was more important. The things that break the most would be the infrastructure stuff, because they spend a lot of time on the software. While in 2024, if you're shipping so often, things are gonna break. So it's more important that things break fast and you fix them fast, and you know that they broke very fast. And we realize also, since then realized that we needed more tools, not just looking at some metrics, but we needed more tools that can help us take a more investigative approach. Instead of just saying, "Oh, your server is down," can it be more investigative? Give me more tools. Show me that, oh, this let's say you're in a microservice architecture. Tell me that the request that the user made to get let's say you wanted to buy food, and then that food went to the other endpoint, and the other endpoint had to go to the user service, which is a different service, which had to go to another service. Show me that
Mm.
full journey, and that's called distributed tracing. Show me the full journey, then tell me which of these steps failed, so that I don't have to go and ask all of these 10 services that were called along the way, which of them failed. Just show me which one. Now, when I go into that one, in that one service, show me for the endpoint that was called all the different things that also happened, and which of the things broke. So you now become like a kind of investigator where you can zoom in and zoom in and zoom in and like narrow down what has gone wrong. So observability is more modern, it's more investigative.
You obviously just needed the difference here because using that investigative approach, I could understand, that observability is more detailed way of monitoring stuff, right? While the normal monitoring that I know is about collecting and generating reports on different metrics, right? That that happens on your system. So you just generate reports, you just show them, okay, this is happening, this is going on, this thing is working, it's constantly showing 200 and stuff. But when an error happens, for example, and then you need to go deep down, that is where the observability happens. And then these tools helps you really go down to kind of trace how it happens, when it happens, what caused it, all these different metrics falls under observability. I think that's the difference because thank me for actually.
I mean, you've said it yourself. I can't dispute those statements.
All right. So nice, nice. So some of the key components of monitoring you mentioned before is like metrics collection, analysis, and then we have the alerts and notifications, which are actually very important, right? And then we can have dashboards. At least I built one for myself. But of course, we can have dashboards, and then the dashboard will have lots of nice reports. So we also have types of monitoring, and we have infrastructure monitoring. I think which is what site reliability people use when they now monitor servers. I think AWS is actually doing those things. When they now monitor
Yes.
servers and all of that, but there's still infrastructure monitoring on AWS itself. I think there's a tool for that. But
There is.
what we are talking about mostly is application performance monitoring, which has to do with the software that we build, the endpoints that we build,
Yes.
how is it
APMs.
the APIs that we use, what is happening to it, all right? Which is nice. So talking about this, I think the next question is for backend engineers just starting out with API monitoring and observability. What are the steps they should take? Right now, we know what they are. Now, what are the steps that we should take to build a robust monitoring strategy from ground up? I don't want you to tell me to
For an
start using.
application.
Yeah, I don't want you to tell me to start using Datadog. We'll get there. But I want to know, like, what should I do first in my application level to make sure that I am going towards monitoring and observability plan, or I'm taking up that plan. And maybe when it is time to implement a tool, it will be easier. I don't know if that makes sense. Okay.
So at the end of the day, we observe and monitor because we're looking for something that is important to us. So when you're thinking about application, so now we're talking about application performance monitoring, that's APM. So when you're thinking about APM, what are the metrics? What are the numbers that are actually valuable to a developer who has you have a software that is in production and that you have to manage? What are the things that are important to you?
Yeah, I could
So
state it.
you say what?
I could help state a few in case.
Yeah, tell me.
Yeah, I think response time is actually important. The
Very
response
important,
time
yes.
for your API is important. And
Very important, especially now that most users. I think there was the statistics from is it Google or one of these companies that most users would leave a web page after 2 seconds if the web page is still loading. Yes, so you were very correct. Response time is super important, but there's a few other metrics that are important, right? So you want to track response time so that your site is not or your application is not too slow that it's frustrating your customers. But what else is important? You want to know about your throughput. How many requests per minute, per second, per whatever am I handling? So that if there's a lot of growth, you know how to respond accordingly. For example, maybe if you are growing 10% or 100% every week, maybe okay, maybe every other week I have to buy a new server, or maybe I should double my server, you know with this cadence in this. Basically, you know how to manage your infrastructure and your resources better.
mhm,
Another important number would be you want to know all the different endpoints in your system and also know those numbers, but for those endpoints. For example, you want to know which endpoint is the slowest so you can fix it. You want to know
okay,
which endpoint has the most traffic so that you can do something about it. Maybe that endpoint it has the most traffic, but the data that is being sent is doesn't change very much. So maybe that's something that should be cached. since it's a lot of traffic. But so tracking a lot of these numbers helps you make different decisions, and that's kind of what APM is about, that you are tracking. And then when you now start to integrate tracing to be a part of APM, you get even more insight. For example, if you have function level tracing, it means that you can look at an endpoint and then see all the different function calls that happen while you were processing that endpoint request. So you see which functions are too slow or which functions that are always failing. That means, when you have some time, you know what to go and fix. Or if you have some time, or if you're already having performance issues, then maybe you should spend time optimizing the slowest function. Or maybe it was from another library, you can just swap it to a faster library. The whole idea is that you need to make decisions as a programmer, but you can only make decisions on what you know about.
Yeah.
And these numbers are the most important numbers. Yeah. Throughput, response time. There's also a number called the AppDex, APDX, which
Hmm.
basically tells you how frustrated your customers are. It's usually a ratio of response time and all these other factors, but yeah, the AppDex number might also be important.
That's nice, actually. It would be a very good metric to actually manage and kind of share it with the engineering team.
I agree.
Yeah, so the last question now, we talk about tools, look at some of the differences. So, what tools and techniques do you recommend for achieving effective observability in backend systems? You know,
So, I mean, I'm very biased. So I'm the founder of a company called API Toolkit, which is uh, basically observability,
yeah,
but specialized, right?
yeah,
So I can give you the story. So most of these observability platforms out there, they are very general. They came from the time when I told you in the 90s, for example, we used to focus more on observing infrastructure and not applications. But now, knowing what's going on in the application is even more important, because if things break, it's most likely the application that is breaking, not the infrastructure that is breaking, right? Since we are shipping very often. And in a previous job, we had to do a migration from we wrote some service into some new technology, and we even though we were very careful, stuff broke. And what broke was basically that a field was missing in our new service. So that field is only sent once in a while. No one knew about the field, and we lost over $2 million worth of orders to that incident. So
wow,
that states me down on the journey of thinking and analyzing how we do observability, and to see, why is it not enough? Because we had the best observability platforms out there. We're using Datadog. We used to pay a lot of money to Datadog. We also had New Relic, and those are good observability platforms to answer your previous question. But why did I create another observability platform? Because I realized that you need to be specialized to the application, and if you're specialized, you can catch information that nobody else catches. For example, uh, most observability will tell you if you have a lot of failing requests. How do they define failing requests? That is a request that has a status code of 400, 500, etc. So they're checking the status codes of the request. Now here's the problem. In the real world, most developers do not honor the status codes. So it's not uncommon that you would see a request that has status code 200, but inside the data it says message failed. So your Datadog will not tell you that something was wrong. The second thing is that a lot of the things that actually break applications. So if you go to any of the software you use, maybe any of this our banking software, most
yeah,
times the app is still working. You can open the app, everything looks good, and then you try to send money, and then it tells you something went wrong.
yeah, happens to me.
So the problem was not that it crashed. So most observability tools are optimized for catching when things crash, when things really go down. But most times the endpoints, the data that is going to the server is still perfect. There's still a response. It's just that the response is wrong. Something is missing. One of the fields is missing, or one of the fields, maybe you used to have a user ID field, which would be an actual UUID or an integer or a number, and now it's empty.
Mm-hmm.
There's a response, but it's empty. So there's obviously a problem, but the existing observability tools would not know this. So I sat down with my co-founder at the time to brainstorm on this, and we decided that it becomes important that observability tools should actually not just look at the logs, but analyze the requests that customers are performing. Because when you
Mm-hmm.
analyze the request, you can catch when things have broken, even if from the perspective of the status codes and the logs, everything is perfect. There's no The log says everything is good, but if you look at the real data, the real thing that the customer is interacting with, you can see that something has broken.
Mm-hmm.
And that's basically what API toolkit is. It's observability. So we have logs, so we log all the API requests that are coming in and out of a server. And if you have third party APIs that you use, for example, we had to use, when I worked at OPay, we had to use Paystack, Flutterwave, Zenith APIs, all of these APIs, MasterCard. Um, it's important to track what are all the third parties that I use in my platform, which of them is slow, which of them is always failing. So you want to track the error rates for all of them. But most importantly, you want to catch when any of these third parties introduce a breaking change. Do you know why? If they introduce a breaking change, your app is going to break as well. And your engineers will spend so much time asking questions like, why is my app broken? Everything looks great. I did not push any update. And then maybe after 3 days of investigation, they find out that one of these third parties that you do not control actually renamed the field. This is coming from True Life Story. So yeah, we're that kind of observability. We monitor the payloads, the request, the response, and we catch when there is a breaking change in these APIs. Then we also we are rolling out support for any kind of logs that we just talked about. So right now we log the API request, where you can like log any extra information, and we are automatically deriving some metrics. So things like throughput, error rates, things like that. And then slowly including support for traces and metrics, basically general observability that you would want to monitor.
Yeah, it sounds really nice from the founder. But let's talk more about tools, right? Observability tools.
Okay,
I've been privileged to use a couple of them. Not much. I'm not trying API to yet, but I will.
you should.
So I've tried Treble. I've tried Treble. I've used Treble for one of my projects. But the one I've used a lot is Sentry, right? I've
Hmm.
used Sentry at work, and I've used it in my personal project. So there's something that Sentry does that I like. Um, I don't know what to call this, but when there's an error that happens, right? An error happens.
Mhm.
It catches the error, you can replay the error, and at the same time, it will automatically create a GitHub project, a GitHub issue, right? A GitHub issue for that error. You know, the way people submit Git issues. So it automatically
Hmm.
creates issues for that error and then give you some tags, some labels. That's really nice. I have not used it for a lot of stuff, but for that one feature, it's really it's really nice because I think one time I used this to I replay an error that happened on our system. Right? One of our we're connected. The system I work with was a fintech, so we connect different banks. So one of the banks broke, and we had that. I had to go replay that and see what happened. And I actually automatically see that on our GitHub issue. That was where I picked the issue because that's how we work. You go to GitHub issue, see list of issues, you pick the one that you can solve and start solving it. right? So I see the issue there. It gives me the link to go replay the error on Centric dashboard. Go replay, see what happened, see what the user was trying to do. And I checked the code, I saw the error and stuff. That was great. So that alone could be something that I'm looking for in a system or in an observability system. So tell me,
So,
start with this first. Tell me how,
so
tell me the good things about Centric, and then tell me how API Toolkit is becoming better than that. Not like you this right? Just tell me how,
yes.
because I like that feature that I use with Centric. So I like that. As a customer, I like that. So API toolkit, what can I expect? Can I expect something like that? And what other things?
I mean, Sentry is a very it's a very specific. So when you talk about traditional observability products, we're usually talking about things like New Relic, Datadog, right? Because Sentry came and introduced a new way of doing things, where you don't really send general logs to Sentry, right?
Mm,
They're analyzing and focusing on the errors, and they've built an amazing system around errors. I'm not even gonna lie about that, because it's amazing what they're doing. um API Toolkit does offer error tracking, which is what you described, where we're tracking and aggregating all the errors that happen in your backend, so that we can notify you. The only difference is that we don't have support for GitHub integrations yet. So, but on the dashboard, just like in Sentry, you see all the errors that have happened, and we show you like how often it's been happening. So you see the charts. When did this error first appear, and how often has it happened, this week or this month or today?
great.
Exactly. So you get, for every error, you can see all the customers, and this is actually what separates API Toolkit from Sentry, because API Sentry doesn't have any of this kind of logging use cases, right? So in API Toolkit, you can see an error on the errors page, and you would see a button where you can see all the customer requests that triggered this error. And this is very, very useful, because I actually have some customers. In fact, I have some fintech customers who, how they use this functionality is that when something breaks, when there is an issue, it's important for a company to send emails to their customers saying, oh, we've been facing this problem, this issue happened, so you might have been affected, whatever, 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 right? But because they know exactly which users were faced by that issue, they don't need to send that email to everybody. They can just get the list of users that experienced that particular error, and then they send that email only to those users. So they don't have to impact the trust that the user that did not face the issue should not know that that issue happened. So the trust is not impacted. So that kind of use case now, Sentry would not support. Likewise, because you can see all the requests that users were making that face that issue, you can easily go and copy any of those requests and paste it in your Postman and retry, right? So that's a level of depth that separates these two platforms.
Okay. So you can copy that request and try it and see the error yourself.
Exactly, on your local machine. Which, as a developer, what is the first thing you do when a user says, "Oh, this thing is not working"? What's the first thing you? What's the first? Let me ask you this: what's the first question you ask when they
When
say,
they
"Oh,
start
this
to,
thing is not
know
working"?
what,
Yes.
I'll ask for how can I reproduce it.
Exactly.
The
You
normal
ask
question,
questions like, "What were you doing? What page were you on? What did you click?"
but I feel
With
like
API Toolkit, you just go and copy the request and you see exactly what that user was doing. You don't ask him that question.
it's nice. I'm not against the fact that it's nice. But now we're talking about Sentry and API tool. I'm still on the opinion that okay, so you've solved the part of replay, But the replay for eccentric happen on the dashboard. Then for you, you have to
Put in
use
Postman.
Postman.
We can't all solve things the same way, right?
It's very interesting. The part of me waking up in the morning, right? This is a system that is already built. People are using it. So I might not have a task assigned to me, but I wake up in the morning, I check my list of my GitHub, I see list of issues, right? Because we use GitHub back in the day to manage our projects. So GitHub has this project management board. So I see list of issues that has been happening, like that happened while I was asleep. I just see it summarized as a nice issue with a link to reproduce it and everything. That really makes sense, man.
Yeah. We have the same. We're just not on GitHub. For example, you wake up in the morning, you go to your Slack, and you see all the errors that happen on Slack. And you can click the link and go back into the API Toolkit dashboard to see all the details.
That really I think that's one of the key things that I've tried with Centric. It's great.
Yes,
Now
I
let's
do
talk about
agree that it's a nice feature. It's a feature we will support at some point. We just
so
don't
let's
have
talk
it yet.
about Treble. Treble, it's great. So you've given us your own points about API toolkit. I'm giving you my own for Centric. So let's talk about Treble. Yeah, so I think what I did with Treble is just to monitor. I think that's spot monitoring. Really, I don't think there's observability. I haven't used that part of it.
There's
But
no observability. I've
yeah, I
used it
think
as
it's more
well.
like this is my request. This is a summary of the number of people that got that. This is that use my API in this location. It's the total number of requests I'm serving. I think that's what I saw on the dashboard. All right. It would be great for API enterprise people that kind of sells API. I don't know. All these companies that sells API, public API. So if they could use that to kind of see their traffic, how it's banging on their website, and where they are having traffic loads, like which country they can provision, large servers on that kind of region and stuff. So how does API Toolkit beat this? Let's-
API Toolkit has exactly what you just described. And
yeah,
I think
it's
it's
hard,
easier if you
but
say it yourself.
okay.
I
So
can give you a quick walkthrough if you like.
of course, that's why I'm here. Let's see that.
So so at the end of the day, we're observability focused on APIs, right? Or any backend system that builds their own API or that calls third-party API. So if you call a lot of providers, we monitor. I might be wrong, but I know that in Treble, you only monitor the APIs that are coming to your server. You can't see if you're making a call to, maybe you're calling MasterCard or you're calling Paystack or you're calling Stripe. You're not going to be able to see those requests. So, one, just like with Treble, we are, logging, and I'm going to show you this in a live demo. We're logging all the requests that come in and out. And in my opinion, I think this is a more natural way of viewing this data, mainly because it's easy to just build very complex search
Yeah,
queries to represent
I think
what you're
Trevor,
looking
Trevor
for.
does this. Let me actually log in.
Yeah, I think they do that, and of course we have the same analytics, which I'm sure they do as well. And then at a glance, the endpoints.
Yeah, I can see this in Trevor.
So I've not
Okay.
yet started showing you the things that make us special. So let me go in and just do like into a real. This is just a test project, so there's not as much data in here.
Mm-hmm.
But so what sets us apart now? Let's say I go into my log explorer and I want to find all the requests that had an error. First of all, I can already see the request that had an error. So that's what this red is. So this says this request had one error. Even though it's a status 200, there was an error that happened. So I can expand this and see the errors, that happened during this request, including the stack trace and everything. And maybe I want to see it like this, right? And like I said, I can always copy this as a curl and paste it into Postman. But the other thing, maybe first of all, maybe you want to respond, but I think the search experience here is much more, it's more intuitive in my opinion, because you see more data at a glance, and you can filter and search and whatever. You can search for fields. I don't know if you can do this in Treble. Maybe you tell me. But like here, you don't only search status code and those kind of obvious fields. Anything that is in my payloads, for example, in the request and response, I can search by it. For example, in this response body, there is an email field. So I can decide to search for all the requests that have this email. And I have this. I don't know if this is possible. Do you know? I'm not a very strong Treble user, so I can't say. So you can search for deeply nested fields inside your request body, your response body. Let me see if I can find even an even more deeply nested field. Let's look at this one.
Yeah, I'm trying to log into to.
Yeah, so let's say I want to filter. We don't need all this. Let's do like this. You can take this. So it's a very flexible query language. So you don't need to use the UI. You can also just write the query. It's a query. It's like, we put a lot of love into building an amazing query language for your logs data. So by doing this, I'm finding all the fields that are nested within an array, and inside that array there is an object with the field title, where the title is equal to this, and I can easily prove to you that this is the case by adding this title to the summary. So now this is in the summary. So give me a second. I think I put the wrong one. But in general, usually we can put anything we want in the summary. For example, I might decide to put um, this SDK field into the summary. So it's just like adding new column. But anyway, that's by the way. But the other thing that we do, and this is what nobody really does, is that we catch these breaking changes. So whenever there is this is not a very good example, but whenever there is a new endpoint, or there is a new field, or any changes that happen in your back end, we are automatically catching it and then notifying the team. Of course, we notify them here, but we also send Slack messages. Um, oh yeah, I can tell you one last thing that we have, and I talked about synthetic monitors, but maybe first of all, I think I mentioned that we can track third-party API calls. So this server was making calls to this endpoint, was making calls to this endpoint. So you can track all the external APIs that are being called in this server. And you can, for example, if I want to see all the calls we made to JSON placeholder, whatever, I can easily click view logs. And you can see that all these requests are the requests that we made to that provider. And you can see that this is an outgoing request.
Okay.
Then the last thing that separates us is that we have these synthetic monitors or multi-step API monitors, which is like a test, right? That you can design and say you want it to hit a particular endpoint. So, for example, this is defined to hit this endpoint, and we can say assert that a particular field is whatever I want to do. Let me first of all run this. Run. Why did it fail? Okay. So I can make general requests. This is empty. There's no request in here. But usually you would be able to assert that maybe some field is the way you want it to be. Maybe this dot value is true, something like that,
Yeah.
etc. And then this test can now be configured to execute. For example, this is configured to do every 2 minutes. Okay,
Okay.
I've been doing too much of a demo. Let me pause now. Oh, one
Yeah.
more thing, you get reports, daily and weekly reports. So you
Yeah. So
know what has gotten slower and faster.
okay. So I think that testing is more like doing stress tests for your APIs.
Exactly. So it's like hit this endpoint, get the data from this endpoint, make this other endpoint, check that this field is maybe what I expect it to be. Basically, what you would do in a test. The only difference is that it runs in production.
Okay. Sharp. So Treble actually has um, where you see endpoints, but let me
You want
see.
to share?
You can view the request. I don't have yeah, I can share, but I don't have enough data on the treble
Okay.
dashboard to is this can you see this?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, so this is my local host. Like I said, I don't have enough data here to prove anything. But but I think right, they have gives you this kind of API score quality and what happened. But if you go to the request, so here I believe you can see the request that people are making to
I
your API.
think they have a demo project. So I think if you exit here, you should be able to see a demo project from Treble.
Um,
Yeah, this one, demo API. Yeah, yeah.
no, this is mine.
No, 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 not this one. The up one, the one
This,
above, the first one. Yeah, that one.
all right.
Yeah, so this would
So
have data. Yeah.
yeah, so nicely, this is great. This point is great, right? You see your top countries so that you can basically just provision more server for these guys. And for requests, let's view this request. It goes down to just like what you have. It goes down to giving you the data about what is happening. It gives you the security audit, like if there was any injection tried, if if the person failed or not, if that particular endpoint failed or not. So it gives you this kind of stuff for each of your endpoints. So you can use it to know if somebody tries to send SQL injection to your endpoint, if that is going to affect your endpoint or not. And a lot of these different API security things. Okay. And here you can basically just make requests and then it gives you documentation. Okay. So I think they have a way that you generate documentation for each of your endpoints, like automatic documentation instead of you having to create it. And for endpoints, right, you can see the individual endpoints on your website, right? How many requests each of them receives, the requests per minute that you get. And then you can now know, okay, people are basically hitting these endpoints a lot. I need to check and make sure that it's always available for people. I think this is more of monitoring your entire API system. Okay, more like monitoring it, making sure that it's great at every point. And then they can identify some problems for you. Okay, like this one, these endpoints now, notice that, let me see the request. It has this delete, it has low, what is this? Low security threats, right? And, basically just gives you a lot more details about your individual endpoint. So for these, right, for this, I feel like they are focused more on the monitoring part. You understand?
Yeah, I agree.
Because yeah, like we said before in the call, monitoring is about collecting data and generating reports about the health situation of your application or about your application generally. And that's what these guys are
So the
doing.
limit with this, the problem with this is that it's gonna tell you that a request, maybe this particular request failed, maybe there's some security issue there. or there's an error, but it will not give you the extra information you need to debug what went wrong. So that's the limitation here. For example, you would usually want the logs, maybe even some traces of what's going on, etc. As extra information to debug, uh,
Mm.
that issue. They also don't have this aggregation that I showed you, where we're able to aggregate all the errors and breaking changes that happen in your system. So at a glance, kind of like what you have with Sentry, where at a
Mm.
glance you can see all the errors and you can prioritize what you want to debug and fix and investigate.
Okay, so basically, I think I will try to check out API Toolkit and also do my normal customer breakdowns and see the ones that do better. But
Yes,
aside
yes,
from
yes. I'm happy to always, chat with you more about this.
yeah, for the people watching, the end product is not about these tools. Right? The end product is for you to actually understand what monitoring, observability, structured logging, all these things means and how they can help your applications, right? So when you have that understanding, you devise a good strategy for yourself, and then you can now pick a tool that actually aligns with what you're looking for. Okay, I've not used Datadog and the other one that you mentioned, so I can't really say anything about them. Right, but for the ones that I've used, I think I've seen their differences. Right, I've seen that
Mm.
these guys focus a lot more on monitoring your system, and Sentry focus more on helping you identify errors and fixing them quickly. And then API Toolkit kind of does a lot more. Let that not come from me, but
Yeah.
is there. I will have to check it
If
and
you
see.
so the thing is, API toolkit is really only useful for you if you are calling other third-party APIs or you are building APIs.
Okay.
Because I have an article where I talk about the shege that I experience with building systems, and these systems are not very reliable. So we focused on what can we do for people who have to call other people's APIs or have to build their own APIs. So if you are like writing other kinds of software, maybe you're building some monoliths with no APIs, you don't call any APIs, then
Mm.
you might not gain as much value from API toolkit, for example.
All right. I might check it out then. All right, so that summarizes the questions for this particular podcast, and it was nice for us to deep dive into API monitoring and observability. Kind of starting off from structured logic and getting to understand why it's even important and why
Yes.
you should not, try to do logging yourself if you are looking at building a scalable product, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so it's really nice that I try to make sure that we understand concepts before tools, and that has been my strategy in learning backend engineering. So thank you very much, Anthony, for helping me uncover this wealth of knowledge around API observability and monitoring. I think I got to know the differences from you, which is great.
Nice one. Man, thanks for having me today. I really had fun on our conversation.
All right, so
Okay.
before
Bye
we
bye.
go, you can
Okay.
actually connect Anthony on Twitter and LinkedIn, and you can check out the project. So please just tell us where we can connect you.
I'm on Twitter at Tony Alaribe, TonyAlaribe. I have a YouTube, but I really just show code. So sometimes I'm building something, maybe I'm building a programming language or a parser or something, and then I stream myself. So if you like that kind of thing, you can search for Anthony Alaribe on YouTube.
Yeah.
And you can check out API Toolkit at apitoolkit.io. That's the website, apitoolkit.io.
All right. So I'm actually going to share all these links on the description of wherever you'll be watching this from. But I want to also add, Anthony is very great with Rust, Golang, what's the other language? Haskell,
Haskell, my baby.
HTML. When did that one come out? God.
HTMX, the best thing since sliced bread.
So he's awesome with this language. So you can follow him for those kind of content. Like I follow him for that actually. So I was kind of trying to work with him to create a course on Rust, but we've not finalized that part.
Soon.
Right. So he's actually great. Guys, you need to follow him. In fact, he's great with engineering as a whole, right? If you want to know about algorithm and data structure, all of that kind of hard stuff, he's the one that makes it easy.
We're trying
Right.
our best, man.
So
Thanks for the
follow him
shout out.
up. Right. So I will drop the links on the description. Thank you very much for making our time for this one. It was really an awesome.
Thanks again, Solomon.